Hey everyone, and welcome to another week of the Nonprofits. Now, I'm not one to speak ill of the dead, but there are three of us here, and I think if we all do it together, we can just blame it on herd mentality. So, Jonathan, why don't you kick us off?
Okay. Should a church providing counseling services or marital services, counseling services, be required to report spousal and/or child abuse, even if it is in the position of the church and its elders and ministers, that a woman submit to her husband regardless of the abuse? Should the government get involved in cult-like abuse of church members? We may get a taste of how the justice system reacts to cults deliberately demanding that an abuse victims stay in the abusive relationship. In this article, Hemant describes an abused wife and her daughter that has filed a lawsuit against her former church and its members of the Grace Community Church in California. She alleges that the counselors she was forced to see for marriage counseling were only interested in making her stay with her abuser and were not honest, impartial counselors. That they were also instrumental in causing great harm to her and her daughter. The minister involved has since died, but the remaining 50 defendants are still on the docket. Stories from the Friendly Atheist, Hemant Mehta, on 14 July 2025. So I would like to heave this back to our conductor, Eli, at this time.
Amazing. Thanks for the introduction, John. So, I don't remember if I specifically have talked about John MacArthur before. I would believe you at face value if you told me we've talked about him on the show before as a collective.
I don't remember that.
I'd believe. It's hard to say for me either way, but I know that it's important that we at the ACA we try to attack ideas and not people. So I am not going to say that John MacArthur, who is like, this is his church, so the things that are going on in this church are directly that are directed by him, right? So I'm not going to say that he was like a truly terrible, horrendous, vile, like piece of shit. I'm just going to say that the things that he says and believes and said and believed and thought, I should say, and represented and did are things that remind me of things that truly vile, horrendous, terrible pieces of shit would say and do and think and believe. Now, that being said, Jonathan, I know that we're all kind of disgusted with what happened in this story here, but are we necessarily surprised? What do you think?
No. I'm not surprised at all. There's no hatred stronger than Christian love. So, they're always trying to go back a couple thousand years, and the morality they have is ancient, useless, from their Goat Herder's Guide to the Galaxy. So this is an interesting one, though. It reminds me of the trouble the Mormons got into over a similar case we covered here a couple of years ago, I think, or last year. The difference being, if I recall, because I'm getting that age where recalling is not as easy as it used to be, that abuser went to an elder of the church and confessed some of the abuse that they did not report as is required by law. 28 states have mandatory reporting for clergy. California is one of them, so there are possible criminal charges that can be brought, ? This is also not the first instance of this not going well for the victims in this church. In 2004, a staffer at the church was convicted of child abuse and sexual molestation of a child and is still serving a 21-year sentence. The church blamed his wife, of course, because they're Christian. Should this pedophile supported this pedophile and still do. They're very nice people. And It's just like anybody who's shocked at this has not really read their own book.
Yeah. or paid attention to sort of, I would say, like the history of kind of how we see churches handle things like this. That last story you mentioned was referenced in the article as well. It was back, I think you said 2004. I thought it was 2002, but I think you're probably right. A church member filed for separation from her husband, also a member of the church, and the church lambasted her. They said that she was like a non-believer and she just wanted to like forsake her husband and take his children away from him, and that she was just like, you know, that she should be treated poorly by the church members, basically. But no, it turns out she was just telling the truth. But it's not really new either for in this. I want to call it Christian culture, even, honestly, Tracy. Is it for like this idea of just not listening to women, right? It's not new.
It's not new. You're correct. It's not new, but even more than that, I don't even think this is a matter. I mean, you could say that it is a matter of not listening to women and holding the testimony of a woman to be a third that of a man, or whatever the ratio that is lined out in their particular manual has it at. But I don't even know if it's necessarily that. To me, even if they had listened, even if they thought this was going on, like, let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say they did listen and think this was actually going on. That's worse, because I tend to think that if they're sitting there and engaging in what do you call it, in some sort of therapizing, in counseling. There we go. Mm-hmm. Counseling, not therapizing. That's not a word. If they're engaging in counsel, I guess I could just make it a word. There we go. If they're engaging in therapizing, then presumably they're listening. At least at the very, so they can hear it. They may even have acknowledged that it was going on. I don't see it that way. I see it as just a strong-arming position. That no, it's a dogma is what it is. We don't care about the situation. These are the outlines that we've lined out. These are the rules that God wants you to do. So this is what you're going to do. And it doesn't there is no extenuating circumstance for a lot of these like super hyper fundamentalist places. There's no such thing as an extenuating circumstances. I mean, you for a lot of religions, they'll accept the idea of extenuating circumstance, thing that is outside of your control that you could not have predicted. Like even the Jewish community will say that God will acknowledge extenuating circumstances. If you're going to starve to death and the only food available is non-kosher food, God isn't gonna hold that against you. It's not your fault. Same thing with the tattoos during Mustache Man's time. It wasn't your fault. You had no say in this. And I really wish that, like, if you're gonna be a pick and choose kind of Christian, which I don't know how you can't be a pick and choose Christian. I really don't. If you manage to not be a pick and choose Christian and still live, I don't know how you did that. But if you're gonna pick and choose, at least pick some nice stuff. Like we're picking the nastiness here. I guarantee at least one person of these 50 people is wearing clothing of mixed fabrics. I guarantee that they're eating shrimp. And even if not, are they like selling all of their belongings and following God like Jesus said was the best way to go about things? No, they're not. They clearly have a car. How else are they getting to the church? But I mean, yeah, they could be walking, or there's horses. But then how are they not selling scooters? I just think that they're being picky and choosy, and they're picky and choosy about like the worst parts. Let's be picky and choosy about the nice things if you're going to do it. But once again, this is an area that I'd like to point out. Sorry, I've been rambling for a minute, Eli. And also John. Well, actually, John, I'm not sorry about it to you.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, that's why I left it out. You refused to call me beautiful.
That's
so
why he
it is what
corrected
it is.
himself.
No, this is another area where principles that are addressed by secular humanism are winning. It's winning again, because two principles of secular humanism, personal autonomy and human well-being, if those had been upheld in this situation, the personal autonomy and well-being of the wife and daughter, who both clearly want to leave and are scared and being hurt, you need to treat people like people. Like, I don't get it. I don't understand why, even if you thought your God wanted this, why you would be okay with it. Like, I guess it's the fear. It all goes back to fear. They're all being abused. They're all victims of abuse. And even though you're a victim of abuse, that does not excuse your abuse of others. But it's just one of those things. Some people manage to be good despite their religion, and some people are like, and some people go to this church. So it is what it is.
And some people go to this church. That's a really, I was going to ask you to, because I did see, in your notes that good despite their religion. I was going to ask you to expand on that, but I think you covered that pretty well. And I agree with you, because in this case, she was actually like directly blackmailed or threatened with blackmail to like, not only did they say like, no, you need to not separate from your husband. You need to not take your child and protect yourself. You need to stay there because that's what God wants you to do. And if you don't do that, we're going to tell the whole church your business, but we're going to tell them that like, the same thing that probably that they did back in 2004. Like, oh, she just wants to forsake her husband. She's a non-believer. She wants this and that.
Eli, and in their belief system, coercion is good because it's a thing God does. Yeah. So
coercion is like the MO. It's not. Yeah. It's just how they operate.
I mean, the whole creation of hell by the Christians, because it wasn't a thing in Judaism. It wasn't a biblical concept. It was to basically blackmail, or not blackmail, but to coerce people. It was we're going to make you so afraid that you have to join our religion, and not realizing when they hit the and
fear for your children, so you force it on them. It's
exactly, and but I really liked one thing in the article that came out, and it says, update: John MacArthur died on Monday night. He was a racist, sexist, conspiracy theorist who protected abusers. That's it. That's the obit. And I said, that's pretty much it. So
beautiful piece of journalism from Hemant Mehta there. And I guess, John, just to keep it with you, not to kick a horse while he's dead, but are there's not only legal violations here from what happened on here, because like we were talking about, no secular counselor would get away with sharing, a patient's private information with all of their, patients. So, and they shouldn't, right? It's absolutely disgusting. So there are ethical and moral and factual violations here as well to kind of what was going on. So build a case for us against Grace Community Church, or against John MacArthur specifically.
Well, the church, John MacArthur, because he's the one who insisted she go to marital counseling or else. So that's on him and the church, because they shouldn't let him do that. But the church violated her right to privacy, number one, and her right of free association under the state's Bain Act. Now, I looked up the Bain Act, and I was reading through it, and it basically is a code back when they wanted to get hate crimes going, more severe penalties for hate crimes rather than just the laws that were already on the books. And it's violated if I'll read it from it, section 52.1 B, if a person or persons, whether or not acting under the color of law, meaning cops aren't exempt. Interferes by threat, intimidation, or coercion, or attempts to interfere by threat, imitation, or coercion with the exercise or enjoyment by any individual or individuals of rights secured by the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution or laws of the United States, or of the rights secured by the Constitution or laws of this state. The Attorney General or any district attorney or city attorney may bring a civil action for injunctive and other appropriate equitable relief in the name of the people of the state of California. And it's all in order to protect people's rights, this whole thing. It goes on from there. And but it's not necessary. It doesn't say criminal. What it does say is that they're supposed to, the government's supposed to help the person bring these charges through the civil courts. But it's just is the city attorney going to have the stomach and the prosecutor the stomach for it? There could be criminal charges, even hate crime potential based on the misogyny, but it would be weak. But does anybody have the stomach to go to court against the church?
Yeah.
But this guy is the guy who condemned a Christian ministry for honoring Martin Luther King Jr. in 2018 and told his audience that MLK was not a Christian at all, and that he was a non-believer who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel. So he was like delusional.
I was looking for that factual violation. I said, I know there's one in there.
Yeah. And so this is somebody who's just beyond the pale. If you need to know what beyond the pale means, I have a good explanation, but not for here. You can Google it. But the whole thing begs the question, how does one get this prosecuted? Will the attorney general or city attorney help with the civil suit as described in the Bain Act? And that we'll just have to see, because it's been filed on behalf of her but from her lawyer on behalf of her and her daughter, who actually was saying, I'm afraid of my, daddy, I'm afraid, and she went through that whole thing. If a child is saying that, don't you think that the abuse is kind of like really severe?
Right.
Because usually they're afraid to do that from their parents. Or at least
like something needs to be addressed, right? Like investigate why
there's
that
a problem
child is
here.
saying I'm afraid.
Yeah, there's a problem here.
Not able to hear you, Tracy.
What?
We weren't not able to hear you that well. What were you saying?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was just saying at the bare minimum. I was agreeing. I was nodding and yesing.
Gotcha. Okay.
As I want to do.
Gotcha. Didn't want you to miss out saying something there. So I actually do have a question for you, though. So
for me,
like, while the ACA, of course, like we focus a lot on like advocating for the separation of religion and government, but things are kind of seeming to like go the opposite, like trend in the opposite direction in the U.S. In which religion is more integrated into not just in government, but in other things like medicine and education, and in this case, personal counseling. So what is, you had some thoughts on churches or religious institutions being involved in non-church things or in secular practices.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with any entity venturing into any venture that they are capable of doing. I'm perfectly okay with that. What I'm not okay with is this eternal sidestepping of regulation that always happens among churches, among religious institutions. There's always, well, we don't actually have to teach real things. All we have to teach is what our book says. We don't have to follow like the ethics that everybody in the country sort of voted and agreed upon. Not everybody, but the elected officials did. We don't have to follow that stuff. We only have to follow our rules, because our rules are what we want to do. that's not really how being in a society works. And I'm getting really disgusted by this eternal sidestepping of regulation that happens. If you want to be outside of, and I'm actually, weirdly enough, I'm actually kind of okay with the with some of the tax exemptions that churches have. Not all of them, but there's a few tax exemptions that I'm okay with churches having. But the things I'm not okay with them sidestepping are their regulations. If you're serving food out of a church, you need to comply with health code, right? That's my understanding. If you're doing taxes from your church, which, okay, it seems like you'd have to follow the tax code, right?
Right.
If you're performing medicine, you at the very minimum have to follow like all of the medical laws and shit, right? So why is it that when you're doing, sorry, I swore, but it's the end of the video, so it doesn't matter. If you're doing counseling, why when you're messing with someone's psyche, is that just not a thing that we allow, that we make them follow regulation on? Your psyche, I would say, is just as important as the food you eat, and just as important as like your organs, where the surgeons are going in there and messing with stuff. So like,
absolutely,
if they're qualified surgeons, it is a church,
surgeons, of course.
But here's where I think,
okay. I mean, yeah,
where I think they kind of shoehorn into is where they believe that the spirit exists and that is just as important as your mental health and your physical health and your emotional health. And
that builds on my case, though.
Exactly.
Because that's something I just said, but instead of saying spirit, I said psyche. Like,
exactly.
They agree with me. They just think it's magic.
Exactly. But because they can use the spiritual closeness, their relationship with God or Christ or Vishnu or whoever it is, to fulfill their spiritual health and thereby ignore the other ones that are important. Yeah. John, did you have any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think when it comes to hurting or damaging children, particularly, then the police should be involved, and I think that and psychological damage to children is insidious and worse, I think, because that affects the next generation. So you're dealing with your future. So I think that churches should be required to keep their church in the church, keep their church and their indoctrination to Sunday school, and everybody else should be going to secular school and learning what the reality of the world is, and then let them make their own decisions. That may not be comfortable for parents because they like their thing, but that's my opinion on it.
Agreed. Well,
and this guy was a piece of shit, basically, so...
Well said, sir. All right, that's going to do it for us today. Check back on Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Central Time for another episode of The Nonprofits. Till then, click below for more, and we'll see you on Wednesday. Take care.